It is 5 minutes on the hour, and I think we do have a sizable quorum to start our session today. My name is Irene Alenga. I am the Knowledge Management and Community Engagement Lead at the Advocacy Accelerator. I would like us to be on the same page on how we will conduct ourselves for the next 90 minutes. And therefore, I would like to have your attention to the screen where we'll be able to share our webinar norms for the next night for this meeting. So we are aware of COVID-19 and the challenges that companies in terms of technology and also accessibility. So we do respect your time and availability in view of the uncertainties. So thank you for coming in and on time. We would like to ask you to type in your questions and comments in the Q&A box, and we shall address them during our question and answer session. We'll try our best to put in enough time, to save enough time so that we can be able to address all the questions. Panelists will use their videos and microphones. All attendees are on mute. If you do wish to ask a question live, please raise your hand and the moderator will unmute your microphone. At the bottom of your screen, you will see an orange hand and you can just tap on it and we'll be able to unmute your microphone during the question and answer session. Let us be respectful of each other's opinions. We are all knowers and keepers of information, so we value what it is that you have to say today. As I said before, we would like to know you, so please type in your name and country or organization and affiliation in the chat box. Our hashtags for today are strong advocacy and digital advocacy. So please share this, some comments on your social media handles, and we'll be able to see and spread the word to other people in your networks. We have been able to give you simultaneous translations because we do serve French and English audiences. So we do have interpretation services. If you look at the bottom right of your screen, you will see a global icon written interpretation. You're requested to select your language of choice in the language interpretation tab and mute the original tab for a good experience. Please stick to the selected language and only speak in that language during the meeting. Our presenters, as I said, our request is to use video only when speaking. Therefore, turn off the microphone if you're not speaking so that everyone can have a good experience. Thank you very much. I would like to pass the baton to our content facilitation and training lead, Vicky, who will be able to take you through the agenda for the day. Vicky?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Irene, for that. Vicky just lost her connection, so I'm going to step in and then she can step back in when she comes back. Today, we're going to take you through the introduction to Advocacy Accelerator for those who did not join us last week. And then we will do a recap of our session last week, the things that we talked about and covered. And then we will go into innovative and controversial digital campaigns. After that, we will revise the theory of transformation and look at how it relates to what we are learning today. We will also talk about the direct digital action when we are talking about the innovative and controversial digital campaigns. We have introduced an app, the whiteboard, where we can interact and take notes and share our thoughts during the session. We will then move into the Q&A session and then do a live poll, then proceed to close and move to the open space where it's a 30-minute session and we get to share our thoughts, what we thought about the session, any strategies we'd like to share with other participants from other countries and the situations and what we are applying to address the situations we are going through right now. So just a brief about ASC. So Advocacy Accelerator was founded in 2017. We are an African-focused learning and sharing platform. We are issue agnostic. We do not advocate for ourselves, but we look at advocates and what they're going through and what they would like to address. And we work with them to build their capacities in order to be able to address these issues. Our purpose is to ensure that locally driven advocacy through country-based advocacy in Africa is effective and has a lasting impact. We aim to strengthen local advocacy capacity, increase the effectiveness of advocacy efforts, and foster greater alignment and collaboration between local actors in the development advocacy ecosystem, including health in Africa. We provide opportunities that help advocates to sharpen advocacy and campaigning strategies and strengthen their capacities to influence and achieve the greatest impact. We work with three critical players in the advocacy ecosystem: advocates, technical assistance providers, and donors.
Thank you very much, Helen. I would like to introduce our speaker for today. For those who were with us 2 weeks ago, you met Phil Wilmot. He is a community organizer, a campaigner, an organizational consultant, and an organizational consultant. He is also a writer and an educator. He supports and participates in social and political movements across Africa, Europe, and the United States. He believes in people power and is committed to understanding and building it with others. He is a co-founder and a former director at Solidarity Uganda, leadership member of the Beautiful Trouble, and the director of partnerships at Climate Clock. Phil is a former fellow of the International Center of Nonviolent Conflict. He reports extensively on resistance movements. His email address is right there, so you can reach him directly through Phil at wagingnonviolence.org. Sorry about that. So Phil, please welcome to the session.
Thank you, Irene. Much appreciated, Helen. Welcome back, those of you who joined us last time. Bienvenue à tous. It's great to see everybody again. So many of you joining us from across the continent of Africa. You can take us to our next slide. I'm going to share a link here in the chat. This is to our whiteboard. So I know when I'm at a conference, when I am, joining people for a workshop, it's nice to have like a notepad in front of me. Today we've created a collective notepad where we can all drop all kinds of things. So feel free to use this link in the chat and do whatever you would like to do with it. Take notes, make doodles, whatever helps you with your process. And then at the end of this presentation, we'll have a look at the big mess that we've created together. So just to remind ourselves of what we covered last week. Last week, we looked at theories of transformation. You might recall discussing ruptural change, discussing interstitial change, and discussing symbiotic change. We looked at the carrot and the stick. How do we incentivize the targets of our advocacy to take action? How do we incentivize or threaten them if they don't take the action that we want? We looked at the trifecta, the 3 key ingredients for successful campaigns. Many of you may remember that that's about building unity. It's about using excellent strategies, and it's about planning. And then finally, we went through a number of principles about digital advocacy. So building on that, we do encourage you to watch the recording if you weren't here last week when you get time later. Building on that, today we're going to look at innovative digital campaigns across Africa We're going to look at controversial approaches to digital advocacy and to digital campaigning. So today is a day of inspiration. It's a day of sharing some stories and some case studies about what has worked and perhaps what hasn't worked. And part of that will be discussing digital direct action, which is also just very, very powerful and inspiring. And then we're going to relate this back to the theories of transformation that we discussed last week. So let's get started. Feel free again, like I said, to join us in that whiteboard and take any kinds of notes or make any kinds of doodles, interact with each other there. We also have the chat box open if anybody would like to use that. And as it was mentioned before, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So we do have some colleagues with the Advocacy Accelerator that will be tracking your questions and summarizing them for us at the end. So we don't want to miss some of the key items here. So one of the principles of digital advocacy that has become so obvious during this pandemic is basically don't do nothing. Don't just wait for the pandemic to end. Find what you can do and do something. Keep the momentum going. And there are two governments in Africa that have kind of demonstrated this within their tourism sectors. So first in Kenya, there was a hashtag called the Magic Awaits that the Ministry of Tourism really used to actually keep attention on the tourism sector in Kenya, even while travel became very difficult. And so they partnered with different tour companies to do live streaming of, national parks and the wild game and so on, just to keep the excitement high, so that when travel becomes more possible again, people will kind of have that thirst to come to Kenya. And South Africa also picked up on a very similar idea, not only for national parks, but all like many of the historical points of interest within South Africa. So these are two government departments within their respective states that have recognized this principle that during this pandemic, we don't want to do nothing. We don't want to just sit down and say, okay, let's wait until activity can resume. Let's keep the momentum building. So we're going to explore more examples of how that has been done today. And the most basic recommendation about getting people active, getting people involved, is to start with the tech that they have. So Cote d'Ivoire has done something quite interesting during this pandemic. Many of our states across Africa have struggled to deal with the challenges within education during this time. Many of us have faced lockdown. Our children aren't able to go to school for obvious reasons. And I know I can speak from my context. My children haven't been in school for quite some time, and it's really affecting their development as young people. In Cote d'Ivoire, the state partnered with private education groups to make the content from the curriculum accessible to students at home. So parents were able to receive books and materials on their phones to keep for free, to keep their children engaged in the learning process. And when they resumed face-to-face classroom settings in September, they noticed that there is a gap between children that were able to kind of stay current with their learning and those who hadn't. So even when the classrooms were able to resume, they developed programming to catch up those children that had fallen behind. Another example of a group that really exemplifies this principle of starting with the tech that people have available to them is a group across the districts of Lango, which is a region in northern Uganda. So in this particular region, a lot of foreign Asian business owners were controlling value chains without the proper licenses, going all the way to farms and buying crops and foodstuffs directly from farmers, and sort of monopolizing the value chains all the way to the point of retail, without paying the proper taxes, using their political connections to kind of dodge taxes and circumvent the necessary licenses to do such business. And this was obviously affecting local small business. Farmers were not getting the wages that they needed. And workers were also struggling. People in small business were struggling. So a small group of people decided, let's use the radio stations. 7 out of 10 people in our region use radio as their main means of gathering information. So they called a strike across all these districts. They said that when this particular list of business people comes to do business with you, don't sell to them until we work out, the taxes that they have to pay and all the protocols, the proper protocols that they should be following. Well, very fast, because this message across radio reached so many people. There was this general strike across the sort of agricultural food production and other industries. And basically, this forced the Minister of Trade to actually come to that region of the country and negotiate a way forward. So, if radio is what's available to your community, there may be no reason to, start to use TikTok and all of these nascent up and coming social media platforms. Perhaps actually radio is what builds social networks within your communities, or perhaps it's something else. So just asking that question, what is the tech that people have and how can we put in their hands what they need? So let's talk about a campaign which was called Justice for Noura. This was a Sudanese campaign about Noura Hussein Hamad. And basically what happened to Noura when she was 15, she was forced into an arranged marriage. She was being abused by her husband, who was also a relative. And he raped her, unfortunately. And then as he attempted to rape her again, in subsequent days, she defended herself and she killed her husband. And obviously, like, this was done in self-defense. Over 700,000 signatures were raised through this international petition that was online. Petitions, signatures, they don't always persuade authoritarian leaders. Authoritarian leaders kind of follow their own compass, and sort of persuading or convincing al-Bashir to override, certain aspects of the Sharia law that he was implementing. That was going to be a heavy lift. But Africa Youth Movement found a way of supporting the national organizations and other grassroots people around the world that were mobilizing these signatures. They analyzed the target of Omar al-Bashir, who was then the Sudanese president, and they found that he was more concerned with diplomacy within Africa than, for example, from wealthy, Western nations. And so they concentrated their advocacy on targeting AU members, basically heads of African states, on the UN and other bodies that might have more sort of diplomatic pull with Omar al-Bashir. So instead of just following along with collecting signatures, they started to do this targeted concentration of their energy on specific African leaders. And this was supplemented by jail solidarity by local organizations, which in Sudan was quite risky. But there were local organizations that would visit Noura and encourage her that there are many people behind you. And eventually, the courts succumbed to the pressure, to the national and international pressure. And Noura was sentenced to a few years in prison. I think it was 5 years in prison and a fine instead of the death penalty. And so this campaign didn't only sort of achieve saving Noura. It didn't only raise awareness on some key issues, but it also spawned other campaigns on issues that were somewhat related. So the death penalty and various manifestations of oppression of women and girls. Forced marriage, rape and domestic violence, all these kind of things kind of came into the public discourse. So sometimes a campaign can have more power than its direct targeted objective. And, campaigning is one thing, pushing our issues is one thing, but as we discussed last time, there's also a need, it came up in the Q&A last week, there's also a need to build infrastructure that we can use. States are increasingly censoring, social media, shutting down the internet, even traditional media is heavily censored in many nations throughout the world and within Africa in particular. And Western Sahara, which is the last remaining occupied colony within Africa, it's occupied by Morocco. It hasn't yet received its independence. But the second oldest refugee camp in the world has kind of begun creating their own solutions. So those from Western Sahara that have been in the camps in southwestern Algeria and Tindouf, in this very multi-generational refugee camp in the desert, they've really developed some of their own infrastructure within the territory of Western Sahara. The internet infrastructure is largely controlled by Morocco, but they've been kind of able to build their own sort of alternative infrastructure within the camps of Tindouf. So what's amazing about Tindouf is that this is a society which is far more self-organized than your typical refugee camp. You have governance structures that are put in place by the residents themselves. So if aid is to come into the refugee camp, there are groups that vet, do we want this aid in the first place? If yes, what should be the arrangement? How should it be used? Even in deserts with 55 degrees Celsius weather at the hot times of the year, they've been able to develop agriculture. Women across the refugee settlements have built schools and other public services and institutions. This is a place that Islam gets a bad reputation for oppression of women. This is one place where women are quite empowered. They call the shots, they make decisions. Men hold other men accountable for domestic violence and abuse. So it's a society with a very high level of solidarity. And out of that solidarity, they've been able to actually put in place 4G internet infrastructure, internet which is even better than those of neighboring states. And of course, it's more free for them to use in the ways that benefit their struggles. It's a very inspiring community that I encourage you to read more about. Let's learn a bit from, so we're just flying all over the continent here, looking at what kinds of digital strategies have been used. Let's learn a bit from, excuse me, from Kenyan doctors, the Kenya Medical Practitioners, Pharmacists, and Doctors Union. Just a few years ago in 2016, they went on strike. And many doctors' unions across Africa have struggled to get public support because they tend to be a fairly privileged demographic. If you're a doctor, it may be that you have a stable job and a higher income than most of the population, and therefore, you might be seen as kind of the bourgeoisie. These doctors, when they went on strike for their wages and issues regarding their working conditions, they made a number of very strategic digital campaigning decisions that I would like us to just consider here. Their campaign began with very little public support. And just in 2 months, it became this national multi-sector anti-corruption movement. And so what they did was they aligned with the shared rhetoric across the country against corruption. So, Kenya had a high level at this point of sensitization about corruption. Kenyans across the nation knew that those in government were thieving money, and this had become normalized within Kenyan governance. And so the Kenyan doctors movement tapped into this sentiment that the state is corrupt, and actually what the state tried to do to thwart the influence that that the doctors and allied unionists were having on social media, for example. The state hired bloggers, over 30 bloggers, at about $200,000, if I remember well, to basically just spew out propaganda about the doctors. And the doctors kind of turned this propaganda on its head. They created a hashtag called Greedy Doctors, and they started comparing the money spent on the medical sector to the money spent for these propagandistic bloggers. So comparing their salaries to the salaries of these 30, I think it was 36 bloggers that were hired. And they found that there was more money spent on those 36 bloggers than the state was willing to pay out to all the doctors. And so, you know, the greedy thing was actually, of course, the state trying to suppress the dissent of the doctors. And it would have been cheaper, really, for the state to just pay the salaries. So they used this ironic greedy doctors hashtag to kind of satirically make fun of themselves in a way that raised consciousness and got people like really interacting. And one of the principles for digital advocacy that I think they championed so well was that they created stories and content of people. So they didn't start by talking about policies. Even if they would make, say, a 2 or 3 minute video about the conditions in a hospital, they wouldn't say anything about a particular policy until maybe the last 1 or 2 seconds of the video. You know, maybe endorsing the strike or something like that. So everything was about storytelling, and this of course resonates with onlookers, and at the same time it provides a platform for people to begin participating, you know. And that's what we see in this photo here. We see somebody who took a picture of a surgeon who had to operate with a baby on her back due to staff shortages at one hospital. So you started to get all these pictures coming in and shedding light upon the situation within the medical sector across Kenya. You started to get even those in private hospitals, pharmacies, not just the public hospitals and clinics, but you know, the private sector as well within the medical community that joined the strike in solidarity because they knew that we don't have the proper working tools to get people healthy and save lives in the appropriate way. So this was a very, very clever campaign, and they were able to eventually win quite a number of their demands and force the state into negotiations. Although, of course, you know, they didn't fix everything, but they did gain a lot of ground. Yeah, back one slide. So I just want to share a few stories from here where I am in Uganda. Of course, many of you know and have been following and lending your solidarity at this electoral period when the internet was shut down, not just social media, but you know, no access to internet completely. And of course, these situations were anticipated by Uganda's opposition. Many of you are familiar with Bobi Wine, Robert Chagulanyi, who was a candidate, opposition candidate for the presidency, who has a lot of popular support, especially amongst youth across Uganda. He's a musician. So he kind of leveraged his artistry, his networks across music and the arts. He built a number of online television stations because he knew, based on past experience, that when it comes time for voting day, there will be censorship. You know, people will be under threat to report certain data on the mainstream traditional media, on television, on radio, in the newspapers. And by creating these social media television stations, we were able to follow his campaign in real time. Anybody who's on Facebook, you know, whenever one of these groups goes live, you get a little notification and you can check out what's happening. Bobi Wine even performed some virtual concerts, you know, over Facebook and social media, which were attended by thousands upon thousands of people, you know, really giving his solidarity to Ugandans during the pandemic. And so all of these stations, it was of course very difficult for the state to regulate the information that they were sharing compared to traditional media, which is easier to crack down on. So that's an excellent, there are groups like Achioto and others that have really pushed out lots and lots of content during this electoral season about what's really happening. A few other examples from Kenya. Many of you also know somebody called Stella Nyanzi. She's become famous across the Uganda, Africa, and the world for her very fierce and powerful, creative and powerful, forms of activism. She was an academic at Makerere University, which used to be one of Africa's most prestigious universities. She lost her, she was under threat of losing her job to the whims of older male leaders within her department of the university, who were kind of playing the big man card to force her to behave a certain way at campus. And she decided that she's going to get the keys to her office back by stripping naked. So she stripped naked on campus. This, of course, attracted a lot of attention and ashamed the leaders of Makerere University, and she eventually got her keys back and her job as well. And one of the principles that she exercised during that action that we often talk about as activists is the principle of playing to the audience that isn't there. So you might not have anybody watching you do the action that you're doing. And this is, of course, in the times of pandemics, when you go for street actions, in real life actions, you can't gather that many people in one place for safety reasons and other reasons, perhaps. And so, she did these, Facebook Live kind of streaming of her action at that particular moment. So she's actually playing to a different audience, not the audience that is there with her physically. And this can be done from anywhere. The location might matter in some instances, but exercising this principle gives people access to to activism that, especially folks that are usually a bit timid and wary of the risks, to go to the streets. And a few other very creative things that she did. She uses what she calls Facebook poetry. These very vulgar critiques, full of sexual language, full of vulgarities, and phrases that are very shaming toward the targets of her poetry. So she released a poem online about basically the dictator and his family. It was very vulgar, and the dictator sued her in court. Was too ashamed to actually give testimony in court, but the whole court process was really a sham. She ended up in prison for a year and a half, I believe it was a year and a half, based on these vulgar things that she had posted online, which were said to have, quote, violated the president's peace. So, this, of course, stirred up a lot of dialogue and intrigue across the country. And, there were all these kind of like debates and shifting of public opinion about what is the quote unquote correct way to protest. And for Stella Nyanzi, like, the vulgarity of the state exists every day in the form of impoverishing people, in the form of oppressing people. And so it can only be fought, with such vulgarity. And these kind of things really gave Stella a platform to do a number of things. At one point, the Minister of Education, who was also the First Lady of Uganda, had promised that if you vote my husband into power, we will give sanitary pads to every girl to go to school so that they don't miss school. And basically, when her husband was elected in, or rather stole the election, there was no pads to be seen. There were no pads to be seen. And the excuse she gave was that there wasn't anything in the budget. And so Stella exercised this principle of shaming leaders by doing their jobs for them. She ran this Pads for Girls campaign across her social media accounts. The hashtag started trending. People started contributing pads, and even some members of parliament opened up their districts for distribution of these pads to young girls that needed them in order to attend school. And of course, you know, this exposes the greed and the kleptocracy of the Ugandan state, and opens up, you know, a lot of avenues for reforms regarding corruption. And then the last example that I want to share from Uganda regards something that I mentioned in passing last week, and that's the flower workers in these mostly Dutch-owned farms, flower farms and greenhouses across Uganda. Not across Uganda, but in central Uganda especially. Basically, these flower workers partnered with artists and actors to create a short video, which was kind of like a hoax. So what happened was that some organizations and civil society groups had tried to raise the conditions in these greenhouses to the Dutch embassy so that they could intervene with the Dutch private sector and advocate for safer conditions. And there was sort of this, you know, kind of lazy response from the Dutch embassy. They weren't really taking it too seriously. There were letters from the ambassador that said that he was very skeptical that there were any human rights violations and that he studied human rights. So, you know, he must know better, and he's just so skeptical. And so these, you know, these organizations realize this typical lobbying, it's not really working. We need to try something different. And the actors and the flower workers decided, you know, let's actually take this chemical that is, you know, poisoning workers to the ambassador. Let's take the chemical to the ambassador. So they got the chemical and brought it to one of the diplomats' houses in Kampala and filmed themselves spraying the gate of the house. And saying, you know, like, if this thing is really safe for Ugandan workers, then come out and have a glass, come out and have a drink. So this was a little film that they developed called Chem Explosions, and they're exercising a principle here, right? They're saying that you know, if you don't do X, we will do Y. So it's what Saul Alinsky, who is a famous historical organizer, called the threat of the thing is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. So if you pose a threat, you know, then somebody is usually likely to respond because they don't want that thing to happen. And so, you know, the Dutch embassy did ask that, you know, before you go public with some of this stuff, let's have a dialogue about it. And then, of course, we were like, okay, but we've been trying to have a dialogue about it this whole time. We've been trying to lobby, and we didn't get very far. You know, so sometimes what you can do instead of actually taking your action directly is just threaten the action. Just another quick, I know we got to move on here, but another quick historical example that exemplifies this point comes from Chicago. So a group that was fighting the expansion of O'Hare International Airport on low-income communities basically told the airport that we are going to organize a shit-in. Not a sit-in, but a shit-in. We're going to sit on all of the toilets in the whole airport and eat our lunches there for hours and hours and hours, so that everyone in transit will not have any toilet available to them, unless you stop this predatory development that you're doing in our community. And the airport administrators actually very fast conceded to the demands of that community, because they were afraid that if this shit-in was able to be organized, that would really disrupt their business. So it's about thinking strategically about our point of entry. What's actually going to pose that stick that we discussed last week? What's going to wield that stick to make somebody afraid about what we're going to do? So let's talk a bit about digital direct action. And before talking about digital direct action, we have to answer the question, what is direct action? So direct action is about taking power into your own hands without giving it to a middle person, group, or institution. So last week we discussed about symbiotic transformation. So this idea that we work within the levers of the system. we use the laws, we use the lobbying protocols, the democratic levers that exist for us. We create petitions, we call our members of parliament to draft new legislation and table it in their legislative bodies. You know, we even do sometimes marches or rallies to kind of like persuade our communities and leaders toward a particular objective or issue. Direct action is a bit different. Direct action is what some people call real democracy. It's about taking power into your own hands. So let me just quickly share an example about an example of direct action, which comes from a place called Amuru, which is in northern Uganda. So you can see this picture here. There are youth on top of a truck. And so I just want to give a bit of background to explain it, to set us up to go into digital direct action. So basically what was happening in this district of Amuru and the adjacent district, which is called Adjumani, there are these indigenous forests that business people would send their lorries, their trucks to collect, as you can see in this picture, massive amounts of charcoal. So they're incentivizing local people to burn down the trees, destroy the forest, and sell the charcoal. And youth and farmers in this area were not happy about this. Obviously, it's affecting their livelihoods, and it's destroying you know, local biodiversity, which is also important for their survival. And so these youth actually went to the leaders of their communities. They held placards. They did some, you know, lobbying. They did some protests, and they were calling upon leaders to do something to stop this excessive charcoal business, which is really damaging their communities. Some leaders did come to the ground. They made a quote unquote assessment. However, they, you know, the 1 or 2 days that they spent on the ground didn't result in any real action. So the youth got together and they re-strategized and they said, okay, we've tried this lobbying, we've tried to advocate and raise our voices, but the traditional means of advocacy haven't really worked for us in this case. So what do? You know, if the police or other authorities are not going to stop these trucks, indeed, even the police own some of the businesses that buy this charcoal, what can we do? Well, they decided we can put up a roadblock at night. We can organize ourselves in shifts so that, you know, from 2 to 4 a.m., you or I are the ones, you know, monitoring whether any trucks are coming. And then we stop those trucks. We ask the drivers to get out and give us all the information about the business people that have hired them. And then we impound the charcoal and we redistribute it amongst the institutions of our communities, the schools and hospitals and so on and so forth. And so they actually did this to a few dozen trucks, and they were able to also make citizen arrests of business people that were, you know, preying upon their local communities and forests. And by the way, what's so interesting about this story is that the youth arrested not only business people, but I believe it was 2 of these business people were actually also policemen. So imagine you're a policeman and some youth come along and they arrest you and hand you over to your bosses. So this was quite an interesting way of taking direct action, where a third party, an authority, a representative has failed to act, has failed to do their jobs. You can do your job. And so the relation to advocacy here is that it often kind of coerces or persuades those who should be doing their jobs to get serious. And so just a few weeks later, you know, there was more attention demonstrated from local authorities to this issue, and they started behaving better. Things have regressed here and there. The story is much more long and complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. Please don't go to the next slide yet. I just want to say that basically with direct action, whether it's digital or whether it's offline, you know, you're dealing with various degrees of legality or illegality. So I need to kind of put a disclaimer there. How you do direct action matters a lot in terms of legalities. So at Advocacy Accelerator, we're not trying to advocate for, you know, any particular way of doing it. What we're trying to achieve here in terms of reflecting on the principles of direct action is to understand how does direct action work within the context of advocacy and the broader ecosystem of advocacy. And so now we can ask the question, what is digital direct action? It's the same principle. We can go to the next slide. It is direct action which happens on the digital terrain. So what does that mean? Let's just look at some examples. One, or actually a few tactics of how direct action has been used on the digital terrain. So, one example is something that's called a hoax. A hoax is basically fake news for justice. We can call it satire. It's about kind of like hacking a situation, so to speak. And I want to share one from early on in the pandemic. There were some activists in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is home to many offices of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and they have conferences there and make all these decisions that often oppress communities across the world. And as some of these meetings were convening, some activists in Washington, D.C. basically made a website posing as, assuming the identity as the International Monetary Fund. And they were promising that the International Monetary Fund, due to the debt stress during this pandemic that's being experienced by 111 countries across the world, the IMF has generously agreed to cancel all of these financial debts. So this is obviously a very utopian, seemingly impossible with the current capitalist system kind of proclamation that they were stating and a promise. And on that website, they had a form that you could fill out to thank leaders at the IMF and representatives at the IMF for their very generous, promise to cancel all of these debts. And so the inboxes of a number of people within the International Monetary Fund were flooded with all of these letters, that, oh, we never expected this from the IMF. Like, this is so great. It's a turning point for the world. And of course, journalists really ate this up. They had a very enjoyable day at these conferences, asking people that are so stressed out because they feel like they've been hacked, well, if it's not true, then why not? Like, why, the journalists were asking such questions. Why not cancel the debts of these 111 countries that are the poorer countries of the world? So it was a very, very interesting and fun kind of experiment. Eventually, the website got shut down, but the damage had already been done. The picture that you see here is of one of the Yes Men. The Yes Men have several films about how they've assumed identities of corporate or state leaders in order to kind of play a seemingly real prank on companies, on different oppressive institutions across the world. In one example where they used digital tools, they developed this website that was for corporate social responsibility of Dow Chemical. Dow Chemical in 1984 had a chemical spill in India that killed many, many people, and of course, harmed the lives of people and others in that community. And there was no compensation. There was no restitution for the victims of this, of this unfortunate incident. And they had developed, the Yes Men had developed this this spoof website, this hoax website, promising corporate social responsibility of the company. So a BBC journalist comes along and asks them, reaches out to them, emails them through that website and says, can you come on behalf of Dow Chemical and speak to the grave injustices that happened in 1984? And they never expected, anybody to really take their website seriously. And here it was, a BBC journalist reaching out to them and inviting them on live air to make comments on behalf of this company that they definitely didn't represent. And just this quick soundbite of a news clip, they promised a $12 billion fund for this community to compensate for all the suffering that has occurred. And you know, right after they get off the air, the cameraman says, "Wow, that's so wonderful! Like I never, you know, I never would have expected that from a company." And and this gentleman tells him, "Well, you know, if we couldn't expect it from Dow, then I wouldn't work for them." And yeah, obviously that was true. He didn't work for them, but the damage was done, you know, and it became this kind of public relations nightmare for the company to clean up, because they couldn't just go on air and say, you know, actually, like, you know, we're not going to compensate the victims. We don't recognize like our, you know, our responsibility here. So hoaxes are very, very interesting. They're very fun. You know, they often go viral because they're just very, very fun to follow. I just love this picture because he's standing, you know, posing with this skeleton. And if you can see on the picture, the skeleton is wearing a sash that says "acceptable risk," and it's just a skeleton. It's just kind of got that cheeky smile. It's great. We can go to the next slide. Oh, and real quick before that, if you can see my screen, here was another newspaper that they published in Washington, D.C. during the Trump presidency. The same pranksters, they developed this Washington Post lookalike that they on May 1st, on, you know, International Workers' Day, May Day, they distributed this across major cities in the United States, announcing that President Trump overnight signed his resignation on a napkin on a serviette in the White House and was whisked away in the wee hours of the morning out of the White House. So, you know, one of these things that hoaxes do is they create this very euphoric moment. They invite us to imagine what could be. They give us hope, you know, they give us that imaginative streak. They promise a little bit of utopia and give us that moment of, wow, you know, the world can be different. And I think that's something that's very contagious, especially right now amidst the pandemic, where we have so many things that are feeling so heavy in our lives. So the hoax is something that is a bit controversial for traditional organizations, especially to pull off, but it's something that, you know, is very, very fun and interesting. Another form of digital direct action, and we're not comprehensively going through every digital direct action tactic, but another tactic that is digital direct action is what we call distributed denial of service. And so, you know, if you've ever heard of a protest where people go into an office and they stage a sit-in, you know, they kind of block the doors and occupy the office, and they say, nobody leaves until we get our demands. A distributed denial of service is basically kind of doing that on the web. So it's akin to a virtual sit-in. It's called DDoS for short. And an example of where this has been used during recent you know, political upheaval and uprisings across the country is in Sudan and Zimbabwe. You know, the various heads of state in those countries had cracked down on dissent, you know, had been brutalizing their populations, all while turning off their internet and censoring social media. And so groups around the world of hackers decided, you know, we need to actually, you know, do something that makes the punishment fit the crime, you know, the punishment of cutting people off from their internet connections. So let's shut down government websites. And basically what a DDoS attack is you take a lot of traffic and you direct it toward a particular website or server or target so that it gets overwhelmed and it can't operate as it should. A very legal way of doing this was exercised by the citizens of Thailand after some internet shutdowns and censorship there. And they use a very accessible lo-fi version. So they didn't need to like have any hacker do anything illegal or anything like that, or use any kind of fancy software. They just coordinated many people across Thailand at a particular time of the day to go to specific government websites, and they keep clicking on the refresh button, refresh, refresh, refresh. And this shut down these government websites and kind of portrayed that, that they have power and that the state just can't, walk all over them at any point in time. So this is a lot of information. We can go to the next slide. And what I would like to do here is actually practice a little DDoS attack. Let's take a break. We've been absorbing a lot of heavy information. Let us stand up, get out of our seats, and let's look around. Let's look around our rooms and grab something that to you represents powerful campaigning. So what do I have here next to me? I have this tin of many, many toothpicks that represents that we need many, many people in order to build powerful campaigns. So please stand up, stretch a little bit, and grab something nearby and tell us what it is. Drop a note in the chat box. What is it that you're grabbing, and why does it symbolize powerful campaigning? So tell us what you have. Drop a note in the chat box. A bottle of water. Katagum, why the bottle of water? Florence has a Bible for the power of information and influencing campaigns. Excellent. Esther has her MiFi router. She needs it for digital campaigning. Absolutely. Badolo has a pen. Somebody says, without water, I cannot survive. That's why I need it. That's a great response. And it also reminds us that, one of the best ways to connect with people is around basic needs. If you speak the language of bread and water, it resonates in the hearts of people. If you start talking about, socialist theory and, even to some extent human rights, that might not be the language that resonates with people. But water, we all need to survive. A phone for digital communication. Absolutely. I like this one from Onyango. A bottle of whiteout, ready to unlearn some old habits. Excellent. That's what we're here to do. We're here to disrupt the typical ways of doing digital campaigning, and hopefully from all of these sessions, we can all grab one or two, ways to kind of fine tune our campaigns that we're waging across the continent. Uneku says green tea, because sometimes we need to be fully immersed in our causes to make a difference. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Excellent. A dictionary, a cell phone, a notebook. We're building here a big tool shed of really, really important things to wage more successful campaigns. Excellent. This is beautiful. Continue sharing. We got a broom symbolizing a community being stronger together. Beautiful, beautiful. Let's go on to the next slide. Let's continue our program. We have 25 minutes before we need to close out this session and then move to the open session. For those of you who will stay with us, you're welcome to for the open session. So let's try to relate this as we feel free to share more in the chat about the things around you and how they relate to powerful campaigning. Meanwhile, I want to take us through another reflection on last week, basically, and how the content from today relates to what we discussed last week. And again, do watch the recording if you weren't there last week and you haven't watched it already. So last week, just as a quick reminder, we discussed this theory for transformation, which I should say compares and in some ways synchronizes different ways of doing advocacy and building power. The one that we often use is what we see here in the bottom right, the symbiotic forms of campaigning. This is change using the system's tools and levers to make change, working within the system to make change. So, whenever you're collecting petitions online, you're working within, the laws about petitioning. You're using the, for example, Kenya and South Africa, use their tools, their ministries, their budgets in order to kind of make change during this pandemic period. And, interstitial power on the bottom left circle of this Venn diagram, that is change parallel to or outside of the system. So I shared the example of the infrastructure, the 4G internet infrastructure and information governance, decision-making processes that are so unique in the camps of Tindo. That's an example of building interstitial power. And then we have ruptural change. That's change that is against the system, against the state, against the bourgeoisie, against corporations that dominate and oppress people and planet. And so some examples here are the DDoS attacks of the websites, shutting down the system where we can. And so, the learning here isn't necessarily that we each need to do all of these things, right? Some of us are better at one or the other. And then there's also the reflection on our contexts, which we made last week. We said that we didn't have, most of us did not have very favorable civic and political space conditions. Yet at the same time, we're using the system, which is broken, the symbiotic change. So perhaps we need to partner with those who are making change in other ways, right? So it's just a quick reflection to kind of situate us within the context of what we discussed last week. There are many ways of making change, and we want to be very deliberate about what kind of niche do we occupy, and are we doing it well in a way that can actually make transformation overall. We can go to the next slide. So another little interactive exercise that I want to invite us to do here. And again, I'm sharing the link in the chat to our whiteboard. I would love to do it there. You're welcome to use the chat to do this, but it'd be great to have kind of a visual in the whiteboard. A strong digital campaign makes the invisible visible. So we all know about this global Me Too movement and what it kind of brought into the public light, right? The fact that abuse is so widespread, so many people experience it and are, forced into silence in one way or the other. And this Me Too hashtag and movement really kind of brought to the fore the fact that abuse is real and it's happening and many people are affected by it. And that happened on the digital space. It also happened in the physical world where we followed students that were carrying their mattresses across campus until they would get justice after having survived rape or other forms of abuse. So a strong campaign makes the invisible visible, right? It provides images, stories. It brings to the fore things that people were maybe not talking about openly or addressing. And so what I want to ask you is, how have you used digital advocacy during this pandemic to make the invisible visible? Maybe you haven't. And if you haven't, what ways have you seen others use digital advocacy to make the invisible visible? So please join us at that link in the chat and drop in a note, put a little post-it note or something that describes how you have seen this principle of making the invisible visible well implemented during this pandemic. And if you're joining us with a phone or a bad connection that doesn't allow you to join in the whiteboard with us, I invite you to take your own notes. Maybe you can grab a piece of paper nearby and just make a few notes about how you've seen people use this principle of making the invisible visible, especially as it relates to digital advocacy. It seems there are not too many contributions within the whiteboards. Feel free to also drop a note in the chat. We have some people that can help transfer any notes that are dropped into the chat. We can help transfer them into the whiteboard for you. Catherine says that her organization did it in the form of raising funds for the refugee community. Refugees, of course, live at the margins very often, and their issues are not front and center. So it also raises awareness about that. Beautiful. She says that those who contributed assumed it was the first time that they were made aware of the issue of refugee struggles. Bulk SMSs to reach the communities with messages of keeping safe and washing hands. Great. Excellent, excellent. Okay, you can take us to the next slide. Feel free to continue sharing. We'll have folks join us with the whiteboard. And I think I'll just share my screen and we can just have a look at the whiteboard quickly. So let's look at what people have created. If you can see your screen, I'm sharing my screen now. People have dropped in some symbols and some notes throughout the course of this. Just taking a little moment to appreciate all the notes and doodles that people have made. I like this citizen's arrest scribble note. That's excellent. Beautiful. Back to you, Helen. And so just with our remaining 17 minutes, there are a few things that we want to do here before we proceed to the open session. Helen, you're welcome to share your screen again. I just want to go through again, what is digital advocacy and what is it not? Firstly, what is it? Digital advocacy is campaigning for change online, building community around those causes using digital tools. Sometimes, and actually usually, this means building community not only with digital tools, but it may include the use of digital tools. Digital advocacy is using tech and online tools to achieve a goal that benefits the public good. It's about leveraging the unique power of digital tools and platforms. So it's not about, just saying that, oh, we're in a pandemic, we can't meet physically, so we have to do it digitally. It's always about being more deliberate and critical than that. It's a supplement to other forms of advocacy. It can't work alone in a vacuum in most cases. Digital advocacy is not something, if you're a coach and your team steps out onto the pitch, hopefully you have more than one tactic, right, to defeat the other team. So digital advocacy is one of those tactics. It doesn't provide for everything. It's not about just making a single post on social media that has no target or audience. It's not about just clicking like and sharing the things that you like. And there's a lot we could say about developing accounts on different social media platforms and building followings and that kind of thing. I'm eager to see what kinds of questions have come up in the Q&A. I think we can take it to the next slide, Helen. And I'll ask my colleagues, Vicky, Irene, those of you who are with me, are there any questions that have really come to the fore as we've been receiving Q&A today?
Hi, Phil. There's a few questions. Would you like to go through them now?
Yes, I would.
So Christine says, is there a way to harness social media trends to pivot advocacy campaigns? For instance, the recent Stingy Men's Association that started as a joke in Nigeria that has caught traction due to Valentine's Day. That's
Absolutely.
the one question.
Absolutely, we can take it one by one. That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, obviously, like people end up sharing and taking viral the things that relate to them, the things where they can find themselves in that particular narrative or story. And you know, if facing stingy men is one of those things that people are frustrated with, then obviously, this is a good opportunity. One of the key principles of using Twitter especially is to really tweet within your niche. So if the work that your campaign is doing relates somehow to the stingy men's, the discourse around stingy men, you're going to want to be retweeting, you're going to be wanting to use the hashtags and to post that content. Yes, definitely harness those social media trends and amplify them. Don't try to co-opt them or divert their goals, but participate in the dialogue, be building content, and especially find ways to invite people to take action. This is part of digital advocacy, is that we're not just telling a bunch of faceless, unknown people what we think about something. It's about actually achieving something, achieving an objective. So where there is like a popular discourse, say in Nigeria or elsewhere, yes, you can jump on that train, but try to build on what's already there. Don't derail it, but try to build on what's already there. So what are the sort of social issues or economic or political issues around stingy men and around patriarchy, around intersecting facets like that within your society, and what are some actions that we can take to begin to actualize the power of this dialogue beyond just the dialogue itself? That's an excellent question. I invite anybody, by the way, to share in the chat any reactions to any of these questions. I love that question. Back to you, Vicky.
Yeah, so I think Jacob has been quite affected by Stella's tactics, and he wants to know, should the advocates also observe discipline and decency as they work? Look at an advocate stripping naked to communicate and pass a message.
Okay, this is obviously a subject of much debate. Last time in the open session last week, we had a lot of debates about how activism should and shouldn't be done, how advocacy should and should not be done, and really there is no answer, right? All of these tactics and strategies are up to the user, and they're up for debate in terms of their are they strategic, are they ethical, etc. A lot of these things depend on context. So what we want to get away from is this binary thinking that one tactic is correct, the other one is wrong, or that a professional person should do A but not B. We want to live really in the nuance and the complexity of what makes campaigns impactful. There's a huge gender element here. There are many overlapping elements in this question, especially as it relates to Stella Nyanzi. I mean, my opinion is that she has all the agency that she wants as a human being to use whatever power she feels is her power in whichever way. And, you know, the fact remains that she was extremely impactful and achieved many of her goals through using the means that she has used. So that's one of the reasons that we bring to you today a lot of these controversial tactics.
So the next question is from an anonymous attendee, and it's quite a big question. So he or she wants to know, what makes a digital campaign to be called a successful digital campaign?
Yeah, great. How do we monitor our impact? That's a very, very great question. And well, that depends on you. What were your goals at the beginning? Was your goal to build a wider audience through promoting dialogue around a particular issue that's trending? Was your goal to push forward a certain policy? I mean, I think the way that you determine your success or your shortcomings should be largely dependent on your own goals that you had set for yourself. And, you know, a lot of times we launch into a lot of social media activity without clear goals, without clear objectives. And so this is also kind of me suggesting that, you know, you should know what you're trying to achieve when you go forward with your advocacy.
Maybe just to add, I think it's also important that we celebrate our small victories, because we may not get to the larger victory, but every victory that we have is one step closer. So it's also important to do that. Lucy, yeah, Lucy wants to know about digital signatures. How impactful are digital signatures towards a cause? And what are the legalities, although these may be country specific?
I'm not familiar with that. Do you have any thoughts, Vicky?
I'm not really sure what the digital signatures are. Maybe it's about the campaigns, you know, those kind of avars and those.
Like petitions?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what Lucy's referring to.
Yeah, excellent. I can share kind of like a quick story about the Banet, an indigenous community in eastern Uganda on Mount Elgon. This is a community that has been displaced from the highlands of Mount Elgon for generations now, and successive regimes have, you know, grabbed more and more of their indigenous land and displaced them and caused a lot of violence against the community and the community's animals as well. And they tried so many things, right? They raised all kinds of petitions and gathered so many signatures, you know, even going door to door over the years. And they petitioned so many bodies. They petitioned Uganda's parliament. They went all the way to West Africa. I forget which country, there was like, was it an AU meeting? And then there was a UN global meeting. They petitioned at so many levels, from local to very international organs, and almost nothing would happen. Sometimes like a department within the UN might write recommendations and then send those recommendations to the state of Uganda that, you know, you should give this land back. And of course, Uganda would say, well, we are a sovereign nation, we get to do whatever we want. So I'm one person that, you know, looks at petitions with a very critical eye. Sometimes they are very powerful. In this particular case, it wasn't working for this community. And so what they started doing was kind of supplementing those petitions with other forms of action. And over the recent few months, the park rangers have been confiscating their animals, and they even shot and killed and injured a few a few indigenous people. And the community decided, let's occupy the offices of the park rangers and the local authorities. And from there, the movement began to grow, and they actually started to begin. I can't, you know, for purposes of security, I can't share all the details, but you know, they started exercising all kinds of other direct action, mass grassroots recruitment, building solidarity alliances with allies in the cities, and exercising a variety of nonviolent tactics within their traditional area. And now the park rangers are making concessions. The state is talking about establishing an MOU or some kind of treaty that can, bring them all to the negotiation table. So they're really gaining ground where the petitions have kind of failed them before. I also heard about in the I don't know if like Australian outback is the proper word, but the rural areas of Australia, there was a very simple campaign using petitions, and it really worked well within a fairly democratic context. They would screen a film about the dangers of natural gas drilling to communities, and then they would, at the end of the film, ask people, would you be willing to mobilize signatures amongst your immediate neighbors? If so, raise your hand. And within just a few weeks, they collected tons and tons and tons of signatures. And I believe this was able to partially, if not fully, curtail natural gas drilling within that particular area of Australia. So yeah, we don't want to say that digital signatures, as Lucy put it, or petitioning always works or always doesn't work. But the question is, what makes it work, and what's its sort of role within the ecosystem of advocacy? Back to you, Vicky. We have only 4 minutes, and I want to be conscious that we need to close up soon. Is there maybe a last question?
Yeah, just as quite a few people are asking for monitoring tools, and that is something that the Accelerator will be looking at M&E for advocacy. So we'll skip those ones, although they appreciate your answer.
Yeah.
Then
could
this,
I
think this is a
jump in to just say one quick thing about that?
Sure.
Yeah, we haven't had time to like adequately talk about a lot of the tools that can help. I do want to recommend building what we call CRM, that's customer relations management. You may not have customers in the traditional business sense. You might have people in your network, members, that kind of thing. But find a tool online that can help you create that database and create several lists. So you might have members, you might have donors, you might have colleagues within a particular sector. Build those lists and be communicating with them, be tracking them. There are many tools that can help you do this. There are free tools that are quite user-friendly, like MailChimp. And then I recommend Action Network as a tool that can really help you build a database of people that are in your network. And that also relates to the question about effective campaigning. There's sort of the issue that you're campaigning on, but also have we built our sort of circles, so that in the future, when we are campaigning on new issues, we have broader networks and relationships.
So I think we're about to launch the poll, but there is, which we'd like everyone to complete, please, so that we know if we're going in the right direction and what your needs are. But there's one really interesting question from Egidi, and that is it possible to conduct digital advocacy well without having knowledge of digital security? For example, when there's an internet shutdown. Good question.
Yes, very good question. We didn't set up these workshops to talk about digital security. There are many resources out there that we can refer you to, Egide, regarding digital security, and it's obviously extremely important. Yes and no. Digital advocacy, you can do it well without being secure, yes, but then obviously there are more risks. And sometimes when you make an impact using digital advocacy, there are more risks, especially if you live in a particular context that has not a lot of civic and political space. Still we can advise like a few general things that you can do to be more secure if you want to reach out and discuss those. So thank you, Vicky, and sorry, for all of you who, we were not able to get to your questions. Thank you for submitting them. We're happy to follow up with you. You can get in touch with me if you'd like. And just to remind us that next week, we're going to be doing a lot more practical stuff. So we're going to be walking you through a process that can help you fine-tune an existing campaign or create a new digital campaign. So that will be February 4th, 2 p.m. East Africa time. And we really hope to see you there. We're going to be now applying everything that we've learned from today and from last week and putting it into a plan, into action on February 4th. Should I pass it over to you, Vicky?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much, Phil, and thanks, Pius, for your hard work and great insights. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We had over 140 people at one stage, which is really great. So we hope that you've enjoyed and gained from the session. If you could just fill out the poll, as I was saying, it really does help us know what you need from us. And then for those people who want to stay on the call for the open session, please do so. You can launch the poll, Helen. Thank you. For those people who want to stay, maybe just a 1 minute stretch break if you want, and then we will start in the open session.
So if you finish taking the poll, you're welcome to stay around with us. In about 2 minutes, we will start an open session where we will invite everyone in for discussions about any topic. if there is something at the open session that you would like to share, you can use the raise hand feature. And we will kind of form a little queue here for those who would like to make a contribution. And then we'll let you know. We'll unmute you and give you the space to share.
I think some people didn't get around to finishing the poll. So I know that one person has asked about signing up. If you go to our website, www.advocacyaccelerator.org, you can sign up there. And just our Twitter handle and our Facebook account here. I think that we can maybe start. Phil, I think most people have left who wanted to leave, and we have 80 people still on.
Great. Excellent. Welcome to our open session. So we're going to just sort of use more or less the same protocol as last time. If you would like to say anything, question, comment, posing a topic, you are welcome to do so. It can be related to what we discussed. It can be unrelated. This is your space. So please raise your hand, use the raise hand feature, and we will put you in the queue. Otherwise, keep yourselves mute until we call upon you. So maybe I'll give it 30 more seconds if I don't see any hands. I have a few things I can share. Yes, Aminata, you have the floor.
Hi everyone.
Aminata, it seems you might be joining us from multiple devices. Could you please mute? If you have two devices, can you mute one?
Yes, one of the devices is already muted. So I was going to ask if we can still ask questions from the other session, or it's just generally on digital advocacy?
Anything. It can be related to any of the sessions or even none of the sessions. That's up to you.
Hello, can you come again?
Whatever you would like to ask or to share with us is okay.
Okay, first I will share my experiences, then will be followed up with a question. I hope that's fine.
That's fine.
Yes, my name is Aminata Jaita, and I work with a women's rights organization based in the Gambia called the Girls Agenda. So basically, we do a lot of advocacy work and sensitization, and during the course of the pandemic, a lot of work has shifted online due to the fear of people contracting the virus and the issue of social distancing. So we have also done a lot of work on raising awareness on how people young women and girls can be protected from violence, and also educating the public about the potential cases of violence in our homes, since most of us will now be living with our perpetrators. But in this aspect, I see a lot of bullying happening online, and a lot of harassment and attack on young feminists that are raising awareness on issues that affect young women and girls. And most of these things come from young men or patriarchs, or even those that are against the act of gender equality and the like. So my question is, on the aspect of digital advocacy, how do you think you can easily manage online bullying, which I know most times it is quite unavoidable, and because you don't have control over it. So how possibly can we minimize online bullying and harassment on the side of young people, especially young women who are raising awareness on some of the issues that affects them? So that is my first question.
Thank you, Aminata. Does anybody have a response to Aminata? Please raise your hand if you do have a response.
Thank you so much. I'm very nice with somebody. Thank you so much for sharing.
Please raise your hand if you have a response to Aminata. Aminata, you asked for ways that we can easily manage cyberbullying and that kind of thing. I don't know if there's any easy way, but perhaps there are some ideas from members in the group. Yes. Shinan, do you have a response to Aminata?
Yeah, I think there is no clear one way to say that we shall avoid bullies, because they'll always be there, especially with pseudo accounts and stuff like that. I think what we should focus more is how to mitigate, or how to navigate through your digital advocacy in the presence of bullies and attacks. I don't think there's anything we can do in the line of stopping them, but maybe we can discuss how we can navigate and how maybe to respond to reduce the amount of bullying, or how we can carry out ourselves to make sure that it doesn't affect our work.
Thank you for your contributions, Shinan. I am going to give the floor to Elijah, whose hand has been up for some time. Elijah, can you share with us your question or thought?
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate for this platform where we can meet and discuss about the issue about advocacy. I come from Kenya, and one thing I'm noticing is that we have a lot of social injustice which is taking place in African countries, and you see some of the things they require a higher hand, and in any case you want to launch your complaint, it's all about resources. It's all about how connected are you to the legal offices, which turns again to be a bit expensive. How can we work towards this so that we may make sure that our people are safe, and there's a way we can campaign on it, and we bring our concerns concerning issues to do with social injustice without going through an expense? Because if I cannot afford a legal officer to speak for me, then you go to the court and it's like there's no support for what you believe is supposed to be done to the people. And with that, the other concern I have, at the stage where we have when it comes to political leadership, we are watching some injustice in some African countries. And how can we get to a point where we campaign on this and we campaign together so that whatever has been done, which is not right, is not meant right because somebody has the power and is dealing with people who are not powerful. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Elijah. Is there anybody who has a response to Elijah? Please use the raise hand feature if you'd like to respond.
Thank you, Elijah, for your question. Maybe I'll try to respond. On the issue you've said about countries, for instance, like Uganda. Right now, Uganda, we're having a problem between the police and the human rights activists. Now, what we've done, we've come up with we are not using WhatsApp, the WhatsApp group, because already they are saying the government can tamper with it. We are doing with Signal. So what they are doing, we are trying to communicate with them, and then we are trying to link them with our National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders and the monitors, so that we monitor what is going on, and then we see how best we can help them, the ones who are in the police stations and those ones who have been abducted. That is one way we are using, and we are using the social media. Two, you've raised another concern about, there's something you've said about, sorry, let me just remember. Let me remember, then I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Kristen. Just a reminder to use the raise hand button if you want to talk. One kind of fairly innovative way that this challenge has been addressed in Kenya is through the creation of social justice centers in different neighborhoods. So it is very difficult for someone of a lower income to cross town, a youth who's unemployed to cross town, find the transportation, have the the confidence to go into like a human rights organization office, which can sometimes be very intimidating, or into a lawyer's office. So groups across Nairobi and across even other parts of Kenya have built these social justice centers where neighbors can become members, and if there's any injustice to report, they have a place within their own neighborhood to report. And in that way, a lot of the legal support organizations can have central points of contact within these neighborhoods in order to get information about what injustices are being perpetrated. That is obviously something that is not done overnight, to build up these self-organized member-based groups across many neighborhoods of a city. But it is very, very helpful, I've heard many members of social justice centers say. Nikki has a hand up. Nikki, you're welcome to speak.
Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Nikki. I'm the South Sudan researcher with Amnesty International. My question is about doing effective campaigning in hostile and conflict environments, and whether anybody in the group has any examples of successful campaigns in countries like South Sudan, or just recommendations on doing this creatively. Because I'm finding it very difficult because the civic space is so small, whereas the price of campaigning and the risk to life is so high. Even pulling stunts with billboards, gets people arrested and thrown into jail for long periods of time. So we have this ethical responsibility and duty of care, of course, to think these things through. So I'm just hoping that people in this group may have experience campaigning in conflict countries and offer some advice. Thank you.
Brilliant. Is there anybody that would like to respond to Nikki? Please raise your hand if you would like to respond. As we're waiting, Nikki, I'll also just share that I had the privilege of doing a lot of work with organizers and activists and organizations in South Sudan. Regarding digital campaigning, I would encourage you to check out Defy Hate Now. That has some more innovative thinkers regarding, what the digital terrain means for South Sudan. Is there anybody that has a response to Nikki's query? It might be context specific, but I imagine that many of us face very similar challenges. Yes, there's one hand. Yes, Christine. I'll also ask my colleague Pius to share in the chat a link to beautifulrising.org, which has quite an arsenal of a toolbox of creative tools for, navigating a lot of very complex situations as it regards, campaigning and political space. A lot of the learnings within this toolbox come from various parts of Africa. And they have principles for campaigning, tactics, stories of campaigns. They have theories and methodologies for planning campaigns. Anybody else have a hand? We have 8 minutes remaining here. Last time we had a very controversial topic raised in the last 5 or 6 minutes. Does anybody else have one?
I think that Christine has asked the question in the chat group because she's not able to speak herself. She's in the office or in the field, but I think she's kind of talking about the challenges of, well, the social digital divide, and especially for people with disabilities. Social media isn't disability friendly for hearing impaired and visually or print challenged. So how do we kind of address those issues when we're doing our digital advocacy?
That's a great question. Anybody have experience or insight or thoughts about that? Vicky, do you have any response?
I don't really have direct experience of working with people with disabilities, but just fairly recently was doing some training, and the difficulties of doing online training, and how even just thinking about doing sign language within a training online platform, and how difficult that is and how expensive it is, and maybe that's an advocacy issue that we really need to be raising. So I don't really have any answers, but I just know that there are many challenges that we need to be thinking of, leaving no one behind.
Absolutely. It does feel sometimes in this pandemic as, you're trying to do the least damage, you're trying to kind of make things work to the best extent possible, and it's just not going to be perfect. But that's no excuse not to do better. And certainly, it is helpful when these companies who are making a killing at this time, such as Zoom, that we're using now, it's very helpful if they make their tools more accessible. It's very hard to kind of put that burden on the user. Christine, you have a hand up as well. Do you have another thing to contribute? Okay, Christine, I think there's a little bit of an issue with the audio. Are you able to speak now?
Okay, on issues to do with people living with disabilities, what I've seen, we've been having Zoom meetings, and what they do, they normally hire an interpreter to interpret for people with special needs. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take that to heart as a recommendation for Advocacy Accelerator as well. Sheenan shared a question that really resonates with me in the chat. Are the organizations we work with and the organizations we work for, are they open to this new and result-oriented digital advocacy, especially the ruptural and interstitial forms of transformation? How do we resource, mobilize, and sell digital advocacy as a method that really works? Those are really, really real-world questions, huh? Does anybody have any response to those? Perhaps one of the recommendations isn't that, you know, every staff should, you know, engage in confrontational direct action or something like that, but how do we appreciate the niche that we have within the ecosystem of change as it relates to others that are making change? And how do we capacitate one another to get the most from each other? So if you're part of a youth, you know, informal youth group that's doing a lot of risky, you know, high risk direct action, you know, how do you get the most out of organizations that are doing conventional lobbying on social media or are pulling together press conferences? And vice versa, if you represent a large INGO and direct action and ruptural change and interstitial change may not be their modus operandi, you know, how can you work with groups that are making very impressive change without, you know, many resources and at high risks to their lives and livelihoods?
Can I just maybe come in a bit on the resource mobilization? Because I think that we know just generally getting money for advocacy is not easy, and maybe even more difficult to get money to do digital advocacy. This is something that we're also looking at as a key area of really working with advocates across the continent. So we will be offering some courses on resource mobilization. And I think it also links to the whole monitoring and evaluation, because these days with donors, you have to show impact. So how do we show impact in order to get more funds to do the work we need to do? So those are things that we will be looking at in the future.
Brilliant, that's excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Vicky. And there's also a question from Thierry, which I think is quite important. It's about doing digital advocacy in the event of internet shutdowns or, you know, basically censorship of the internet or shutdown of the internet. So one thing that I would recommend, which we did during this recent shutdown in Uganda, years ago, we anticipated that eventually something like this might happen. And on a number of our social media accounts for the organization Solidarity Uganda, we had people based in the diaspora in different countries. And we trained them on the kind of content that we want to push out. And so when the internet was shut down across all the regions of Uganda, we had these regional coordinators that were calling people on the phone and asking them what's happening in your community, what's happening at the polls. Is there any police brutality? Is there any voter fraud or ballot stuffing? And then we would take that information, give it to one person, a central person, that diasporans who had control over the social media accounts or access to them, including one I saw was amongst our attendees here today. They could share that information. So we didn't get a lot of information out. We didn't concentrate on that too much, but we stayed a little bit active. And there's also something that you can do with Twitter. You can set it up for, I think Twitter's already optimized for SMS. So you can learn more about how to tweet via SMS, so that even if the internet goes down, you can still get some tweets out there. But of course, the question is also, to what extent does that help you with what you need at that particular moment? So we're about to close down on our time. I want to give the floor to the last remaining hand, which is Amazu. And then we can say goodbye until next week. Amazu. Amazu Godwin. Great. Sorry if we haven't been able to address your particular topic, and thank you so much for the continued use of the chat box. I really look forward to reading these messages later that I haven't been able to keep good track of. Much appreciated for all the rich conversation, and looking forward to seeing you all again 2 o'clock East Africa time next week on Thursday. Vicky, do you have anything that you want to add before we sign off?
Just to say thank you for people for staying behind and engaging. It's really nice to hear people's voices. It's very difficult when you have 140 people on, but it is nice to hear voices. We will be sending the recording and the presentation to everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much, Phil, for facilitating. Bye,
well,
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.